They told my husband the engagement party was family only, and he left me standing in the driveway like a stranger. He acted shocked when the locks started changing from the inside. By sunrise, his mother's club status was in freefall, and the family's biggest deal suddenly smelled like smoke. They thought my silence meant I had no power. It meant I was choosing exactly where the first domino would fall. My name is Riley Mercer. In Seabrook Heights, where the ocean air smells like salt and old money, silence is a currency. I have learned to hoard it. I am 34 years old. I am not from here, and I am certainly not a Caldwell. To them, I am a variable they cannot quite solve, so they try to erase me instead. Nate is different when we are alone in our apartment downtown. He is solid, kind, the sort of man who remembers how I take my coffee and actually listens when I talk about regulatory compliance. But the moment we cross the threshold of the Caldwell estate, he shrinks. It is a physical reaction, a survival instinct kicking in. He reverts to being the middle child, the one who exists solely to smooth over the cracks left by his brothers, and there are always cracks. Lorraine Caldwell, his mother, rules that house with a weaponized form of politeness. She does not yell. She smiles while she dissects you. Bruce, his father, sits at the head of the table like a king on a fading throne, obsessed with legacy and board seats. Then there is Dylan, the oldest, the CEO of Caldwell Development Partners, who wears his ruthlessness like a tailored suit, and Logan, the baby, the golden boy who can do no wrong even when he is doing everything wrong. Sunday dinners are a ritual of bloodless cuts. It starts with the seating chart. Lorraine always moves my place card to the spot with the draft or the view of the pantry. She introduces me to guests not as a consultant, but with a vague wave of her hand. "This is Riley," she says. She does, some lovely little charity work, I believe. Then comes the wine, and then the questions. Still no news. Riley, she asked last week, her eyes scanning my waistline. Dylan's wife was already pregnant with her second by this age. Tick-tock. Dear. I just took a sip of water. I did not correct her. I did not tell her that my little charity work is actually the Mercer Governance Lab. I do not arrange flowers for galas. I advise boards on how to avoid federal indictments. I audit reputational risk. I specialize in finding the exact moment a company's ethical compromise becomes a legal fatality. I do not plant gardens. I plant red flags. For the first 2 years of our marriage, I tried to fit in. I bought the pastel dresses. I laughed at Bruce's dull stories. I tried to be the daughter-in-law they wanted. It did not work. Now, I practice a disciplined politeness. I smile. I nod, and I memorize everything. Nate always apologizes in the car on the way home. "I'm sorry," he says, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turn white. "I'll talk to her, Riley. I promise. She's just old-fashioned." "It's fine," I say. It is not fine. But arguing with Nate about his mother is like shouting at a wall. I stopped arguing the day I realized that power in this town does not come from raising your voice. It comes from knowing who signed the paper. Last month, I was in the hallway, ostensibly looking for the powder room, when I heard Dylan's voice booming from the study. He was talking about Harborline Commons, the massive waterfront project that was supposed to double the family fortune. "It's a go," Dylan said. I pushed the timeline up by 3 months. But the environmental impact reports aren't back. Nate's voice was quieter, shaking. "We can't break ground without the soil toxicity sign-off. Dylan, if the EPA audits us..." "Stop being such a coward." "Nate," Dylan snapped, "the reports will say what I pay them to say. Just make sure the financing draws are signed by Friday." I walked back to the dining room and finished my dessert. I watched Dylan laugh at a joke he made about a contractor he had stiffed. I watched Bruce beam with pride at his shark of a son. I watched Nate crumble into his wine glass. They built that house on a cliff to intimidate the storms coming off the Atlantic. It is all marble columns and mahogany doors, designed to look unshakable, but every time I walk through the front door now, I feel the vibration under my heels. They think they are standing on solid rock. They do not realize the foundation is already hollow, and I am the only one holding the map of the sinkholes. The engagement was announced on a Tuesday, and it felt less like a romantic milestone and more like the closing of a high-value merger. Logan had proposed to Vivian Lockhart, a girl whose last name carried as much weight in Seabrook Heights as the gold reserves. The ring on her finger was not a promise. It was a billboard. It was a 5-carat emerald cut that screamed old money and secure bloodlines. The atmosphere inside the Caldwell house shifted immediately. It became a stage for their collective victory. We were all gathered in the solarium for drinks when Logan broke the news. Lorraine brought her hands to her chest, producing a single, perfect tear right on cue. Bruce stood up and shook Logan's hand with a vigor I had never seen him use with Nate. It was the handshake of a man securing his legacy. Dylan, leaning against the French doors with a scotch in hand, just smirked. "Finally," Dylan said, raising his glass. "Someone in this family is bringing in a genuine asset." Nate stiffened beside me, but he said nothing. He just took a long swallow of his drink. Then came the logistics. Lorraine dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin and took command of the room. "We must celebrate properly," she announced, her voice trembling with theatrical joy. "This Saturday, the Seabrook Yacht and Heritage Club. Just a dinner. Elegant. Timeless." She paused, looking around the room, her gaze sliding over me like I was made of glass before landing warmly on Vivian. "And intimate," Lorraine added, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "Strictly family only. We want to keep this pure." I felt the air leave the room, at least for me. Family only. The phrase hung there, heavy and deliberate. I waited for the clarification. I waited for the polite nod in my direction. "Of course, you are included." Riley that usually followed these passive-aggressive declarations. It never came. For the rest of the week, I waited. I checked the mail for an invitation. I checked my phone for a text from Lorraine or a group email. I even waited for Nate to ask me what I planned to wear, or to complain about having to buy a new tie. But there was only silence. It was a tactical silence, calibrated to make me ask, to make me beg for inclusion so they could have the pleasure of denying me. By Friday evening, the silence had turned into a physical weight in our apartment. We were in the kitchen. Nate was pretending to read a briefing on his tablet, but his eyes were darting around. His phone, sitting on the granite counter, lit up. It was a notification from WhatsApp. The group name flashed clearly on the screen. Caldwell Inner Circle. Nate lunged for the phone, flipping it face down so fast it made a sharp clack against the stone. He looked up at me, his smile tight and terrified. "Work stuff," he muttered. "Just Dylan being Dylan." I set down the dish towel. I did not raise my voice. I used the tone I reserve for non-compliant board members who are trying to hide a conflict of interest. "What time does the dinner start on Saturday?" "Nate?" I asked. He froze. It was a 5-second pause that stretched out like a confession. He looked at the fridge. He looked at the floor. He looked anywhere but at me. Well, it's complicated." "Rye," he stammered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom is really stressed about the guest list. The club has these new restrictions on the private dining room, and she wanted to keep it really small. You know how she gets." "I know exactly how she gets," I said, leaning against the counter. "I am asking about the time. It is just immediate family," Nate said, his voice dropping, pleading. "Just parents and siblings. To welcome Vivian. Honestly, you probably wouldn't even like it. It's going to be stuffy and boring, and they will just talk about the wedding planning all night." I looked at my husband. He was a grown man, a vice president at a development firm. Yet here he was. twisting himself into knots to justify his mother's cruelty. "Nate," I said, my voice very quiet, "we have been married for 6 years. If I am your wife, what am I in the context of family only?" He flinched. He knew there was no answer to that question that did not incriminate him. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them with a look of exhaustion that he wanted me to pity. "Please, Riley," he whispered, "don't make this hard for me. I can't fight them on this right now. Not with the deal pending. Just let it go." For me, he was leaving me outside the door. He was choosing the path of least resistance, even if it meant I had to stand in the cold. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something crucial snap. It was not a loud break. It was the quiet click of a deadbolt sliding into place. "Fine," I said. Nate let out a breath of relief, thinking he had won, thinking he had managed the crisis. He did not realize that fine was not a concession. It was a conclusion. Saturday arrived with a suffocating kind of brightness. The sun was setting over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, but inside our apartment, the air felt thin. Nate stood before the full-length mirror in the hallway, adjusting the cuffs of his navy suit. It was the suit I had selected for him 3 months ago for a shareholders' meeting, the one that made his shoulders look broader than they actually were. I sat on the edge of the beige sofa, wearing a pair of gray cashmere sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt. I looked like I was recovering from an illness, which, in a way, I suppose I was. I was recovering from the illusion that I was part of this family. Nate turned to me, his hand hovering over his tie. He wanted me to fix it. He wanted the ritual. He wanted me to stand up, walk over, tighten the knot, and tell him he looked handsome so he could walk out that door without the weight of guilt dragging his hemline. I did not move. "Does it look straight?" he asked, his voice tight. "It looks fine." "Nate," I said, not looking at the tie, but at the space just above his left shoulder. He lingered by the door, checking his pockets for his keys, his wallet, his phone. He was stalling. He knew what he was doing was cowardly, but he did not have the spine to stop doing it. "Hey," he said, forcing a brightness into his tone that sounded brittle. "I won't stay late, and I'll bring you back a piece of that lemon tart you like, the one with the burnt meringue." I looked at him then. I looked at the man who had vowed to forsake all others, now bargaining with pastry to buy his way out of betrayal. "No," I said softly. "Don't bother. I won't be hungry." He flinched, the rejection hitting him harder than a shout would have. "Okay. I'll call you when I'm leaving. Have a good time." "Nate." The door clicked shut. The sound was final. It echoed in the empty foyer, a sharp punctuation mark ending the sentence of our partnership. I sat there for a long time as the apartment grew dark. I looked out at the city skyline, the twinkling lights of Seabrook Heights mocking me from the distance. Somewhere out there, at the Yacht and Heritage Club, a photographer was undoubtedly arranging them. Chin up, Lorraine. Hand on shoulder, Bruce. Big smile, Vivian. There would be a gap in the line where I should have stood, but by tomorrow, the narrative would be that I was busy, or sick, or simply not important enough to be framed. I stood up. The sadness that had been pooling in my chest began to harden. It cooled into something structured, something architectural. This was not just a dinner I was missing. This was a statement. They were telling me I did not belong. I walked down the hall to the room Nate jokingly called the library because of the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. To me, it was the war room. It was where the Mercer Governance Lab operated. I sat at my desk and turned on the single brass lamp. The pool of yellow light fell on my leather-bound notebook. I opened it to a fresh page. My hand was steady. I had rules for my work, and I would apply them here. Rule 1. No collateral damage. I would not touch the nieces or nephews. I would not hurt anyone who could not defend themselves. Rule 2. Target the system, not the person. I picked up my pen and drew 3 vertical columns. At the top of the first, I wrote public behavior. At the top of the second, ethical conflict. And at the third sign-off point, I began to fill the columns. I did not need to scream. I needed to audit. I thought about Lorraine. Lorraine, who demanded family-only exclusivity while preaching about community. And then I remembered. It was a small detail, something I had filed away months ago. Lorraine was currently the honorary chair of the Inclusive Communities campaign for the Marwick Museum. She was literally the poster child for diversity and welcoming spaces in Seabrook. She also sat on the board of the Community Grant Trust, which had very strict bylaws regarding the discriminatory conduct of its members. I looked at the words on the page. The hypocrisy was not just annoying, it was actionable. It was a reputational risk that had not been disclosed. I capped my pen. The silence in the apartment was no longer lonely. It was focused. It was the quiet before the gavel comes down. If they want family only, I whispered to the empty room. Then by tomorrow morning, they will have exactly that, and nothing else. I picked up my phone. I did not dial with anger. I dialed with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. It was 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, but in the world of high-stakes reputation management, nobody truly sleeps. My first call was to Arthur Penhaligon, the director of the Marwick Museum. He answered on the second ring, sounding slightly out of breath. Likely at a dinner he wished he could leave. Riley, he asked, "Is everything all right? We aren't due for a compliance audit until next quarter. This is not an audit." "Arthur," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "This is a courtesy call regarding a potential image risk. I understand Lorraine is the face of your upcoming Inclusive Communities campaign. Yes, she is the honorary chair. Why, she is currently hosting a high-profile engagement party at the club. She has explicitly instituted a policy excluding her lawful daughter-in-law based on, let us call it family purity. If the press picks up that your inclusivity champion is enforcing segregation at her own table, the donor backlash could be significant. I suggest you prepare a media response." I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end. She wouldn't be that careless. Check the guest list. Arthur, I just wanted you to be ahead of the story. I hung up. Call time 3 minutes. My second call was to the society editor at the Seabrook Ledger. We had a transactional relationship. I gave her tips on corporate mergers. She gave me silence when I needed it. "Riley Mercer," she chirped. "To what do I owe the pleasure I saw the draft for the Sunday Social column?" I lied smoothly. "You might want to double-check the captioning on the Caldwell photos tonight. There is a rather interesting gap in the family lineup. It might look like an editorial error if you don't address why one wife is missing." "Wait," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Are you not there? I am at home, protecting my peace. You do the math." I ended the call before she could ask for a quote. Silence is often the loudest confirmation. My third call was the lever that would pry the foundation loose. I called validation. I dialed a contact on the standards committee of the Seabrook Yacht and Heritage Club, Mrs. Mercer. He answered formally. "Good evening. Charles, I have a question regarding the club's bylaws. Is there a new clause regarding spousal rights? Specifically, does a member have the right to bar a spouse of a guest from entering the premises for a private event? It feels like a discrimination lawsuit waiting to happen." There was a long pause, and then a heavy, exhausted sigh. "Oh, God, is Lorraine doing it again?" Charles asked, his professional veneer cracking. "We already have 2 internal incident reports from last month. She reduced a server to tears over a water glass. The board is terrified she is going to create a hostile workplace lawsuit. I did not have to light the match. The wood was already soaked in gasoline. If those reports exist." "Charles," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "you need to open that file tonight. If she abuses staff while excluding family, and you let it happen, the club is complicit. Liability does not sleep on weekends. I will call the manager on duty, he said, sounding panicked. Thank you, Riley. My fourth call was to the compliance officer of the Seabrook Community Grant Trust. Stop the print run on the fundraising letters, I said as soon as she answered. What we are mailing them Monday. Lorraine's signature is on 20,000 envelopes. And if her standing with the yacht club and the museum is revoked by Monday morning due to ethical violations, those envelopes become waste paper. Pause it until you can verify her status aligns with the trust's core values. I will put a hold on it. I set the phone down. I opened my laptop and logged the timeline in a spreadsheet. 8:10 p.m. notification of reputational risk to Marwick Museum. 8:15 p.m. tip regarding exclusionary practices to press. 8:20 p.m. liability warning regarding member conduct to venue. 8:23 p.m. advisory to suspend use of name likeness for fundraising. It looked clean. It looked bureaucratic. It looked like I was doing my job. Finally, I sent one email. It was to a senior risk analyst at First Harbor Capital, the bank financing the Caldwell's massive harbor project. I did not mention the party. I did not mention my feelings. I wrote a single line FYI internal governance indicators for the Caldwell portfolio are shifting rapidly. You may want to initiate a character review before the next tranche of funding releases. I hit send. 23 minutes. 4 calls. 1 email. I closed my laptop. The fan whirred into silence. I turned off the desk lamp, plunging the room into darkness. I had not screamed. I had not thrown a vase. I had simply closed the file. Nate stumbled through the door at 6:15 in the morning. The smell of stale cigar smoke and a floral perfume that was definitely not mine clung to his wrinkled suit. I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen island in a silk blouse and tailored trousers, my hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. I looked like I was waiting for a board meeting to commence, not my husband. He blinked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and glassy. Riley, he mumbled, loosening his tie. Why are you up? I got stuck talking to Dylan. It got late. Good morning. Nate, I said evenly. Before he could offer another weak excuse, his phone began to buzz against the marble countertop. It was a jarring, persistent sound. The screen flashed Dad. Nate frowned and swiped to answer. Dad, it is early. Wait. Slow down. What letter? I watched the color drain from his face. It was a slow, satisfying fade, like watching a fever break. Suspended, Nate repeated, his voice rising in panic. What do you mean, suspended? Mom has been a member for 30 years. Violation of member standards. Harassment of staff, discriminatory conduct. Dad, that's insane. He listened for another 10 seconds, then lowered his voice as heads turned. The yacht club, he whispered, as if saying the name of a deceased relative. They suspended Mom's membership privileges pending a disciplinary review. They said there were multiple complaints filed last night regarding her treatment of the waitstaff and guest exclusion policies. Organizations are very sensitive to their brand image these days. Nate, I said, taking a calm sip of coffee. Exclusionary practices at private events often trigger liability clauses. It is standard governance. His phone pinged, a sharp chime, then another, then a rapid succession of vibrations. Oh my God, Nate said, reading the notifications. The Community Grant Trust just sent an email. They are asking Mom to temporarily step aside from her honorary chair position. And the museum. Arthur just texted. He says they are putting the campaign on hold due to conflicting values. Then the real blow landed. The phone rang again. This time it was Dylan. Nate put it on speaker because his hands were shaking too hard to hold it to his ear. Nate. What the hell is going on? Dylan roared, his voice cracking with a rare desperation. First, Harbor Capital just froze the underwriting for Harborline Commons. They called me 5 minutes ago. They cited reputational risk and instability in family leadership. They are initiating a full character audit on the trust. Nate stared at the phone. Dylan, I don't know. Mom is losing her mind over the club. Fix it, Dylan screamed. Find out who leaked the internal reports. Nate hung up. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, suffocating. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in years. He saw the coffee, the clothes, the absolute lack of surprise on my face. Riley, he breathed, stepping back as if I were holding a knife. What? What did you do? I didn't break anything. Nate, I replied, my voice cool and steady. I didn't lie. I didn't scream. I simply reported the risks. I am a risk assessor. I assessed. Suddenly, the front door flew open. They didn't buzz up. They didn't knock. Bruce and Lorraine stormed into our apartment as if they held the deed to the floorboards. Lorraine looked frantic, her perfect hair coming undone at the temples. Bruce looked ready to kill. Fix this. Nathan! Bruce barked, marching into the kitchen and ignoring me completely. Call the lawyers. Threaten to sue the club for defamation. Tell the bank it is a misunderstanding. Tell them we will pull our accounts. You cannot sue the club. Bruce, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through their panic like a razor. They froze. They turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw it. Not annoyance, fear. Section 42 of the club bylaws clearly states that member conduct affecting the public standing of the institution is grounds for immediate suspension. I continued, reciting the text from memory. And regarding the bank, if you threaten them while they are conducting a formal character review, the compliance officer, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, I believe will be legally obligated to flag the account for federal review under banking regulations. You will turn a pause into an indictment. The room went dead silent. Lorraine stared at me, her chest heaving. She realized then that I knew the names. I knew the codes. I knew the wires that held their world up. And I knew exactly which ones I had cut. You did this, Lorraine hissed, her face twisted into a mask of ugly, desperate rage. You poisonous little, I ensured compliance. I interrupted her. You wanted family only. Lorraine, you made it very clear that I was a liability to your image. I simply ensured the rest of the world saw that image clearly. Lorraine turned to Nate. Her eyes were wild, cornered animals. Nathan, she said, her voice trembling with the weight of an ultimatum. You make a choice right now. Are you a Caldwell, or are you hers? I looked at my husband. The war had officially begun. By noon on Monday, Dylan had launched the counteroffensive. It was efficient, brutal, and entirely predictable. He did not deny the facts because facts are stubborn things. Instead, he attacked the source. The narrative rippled through the country clubs and boardrooms of Seabrook Heights. Within hours, Riley Mercer was unstable. She was obsessed with her mother-in-law. She had demanded a loan for her struggling business, and when the family refused, she had lashed out in a psychotic break. It was a clean lie. It gave the elite exactly what they wanted, a reason to ignore the rot in their own foundations and focus on the hysterical woman standing outside the gate. Nate came home early, looking like a man who had been slapped repeatedly by invisible hands. I can't even go to the squash court, he said, pouring himself a drink with a shaking hand. Greg asked me if you were seeing a specialist. He asked if you needed support with such a pitiful look on his face. It's humiliating. Riley, it is designed to be, I said, typing on my laptop. But the damage was not just social. My phone, usually buzzing with consultation requests, was dead silent. I checked my calendar. 3 meetings for next week had been canceled. No explanations, just vague rescheduling notices. My clients were not dropping me because they thought I was wrong. They were dropping me because in this town, you do not stand next to the person pointing at the fire. You stand next to the arsonist, provided he is wearing a nice suit. Then, My personal cell rang. It was a number I did not recognize. "Hello, Riley." The voice was whisper-thin and shaking. "It's Vivian. Can you talk? I am in my car." I stopped typing. "I am here. Vivian?" "Lorraine told me you weren't invited because you were handling a crisis at your company," she said, the words tumbling out fast. "She said you begged off to save your reputation." I believed her, but then I saw the emails, the ban from the club. Riley, they lied to my face. That is what they do. Vivian, they rewrite reality until it fits the frame. If they do this to you after 6 years, she stammered, and I could hear the tears in her voice. What will they do to me in 6 months if I wear the wrong dress? Or if I disagree with Bruce? I don't think I can marry into this. Breathe. I said, "You have leverage now. Do not let them see you are afraid. Fear is the only currency they accept." She hung up, but the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer alone. An hour later, Nate walked into the office. He looked sick. He placed a thick envelope on my desk. It had the letterhead of the family's Pitbull law firm. "Dylan says he is filing for defamation and breach of privacy," Nate said, his voice hollow. "He wants a full retraction. He wants you to sign a statement admitting you fabricated the compliance issues due to mental distress. And he wants your client list and professional license number for a competency review." I looked at the envelope. It was not a lawsuit. It was an execution order. If I signed, my career was over. I would be the crazy ex-wife who made up stories. If I did not sign, Dylan would burn my network to the ground with lawsuits and rumors. "He said he will bury you." "Riley," Nate whispered. "He said you have 24 hours. I stood up and walked over to the wall, safe behind a landscape painting. I spun the dial. Left, right, left. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, next to our passports and some emergency cash, sat a small, black hard drive. 3 years ago, Dylan had been too cheap to hire a forensic accountant to organize his messy personal investments for a tax audit. He had asked me to be a deer and sort through his digital files, assuming I was just a glorified secretary who wouldn't understand the complex web of shell companies and offshore transfers. He was wrong. I understood everything. I took the drive out and weighed it in my hand. It felt light, but it held enough voltage to electrocute the entire Caldwell empire. "He thinks I am playing a game of emotions," I said to Nate, placing the drive on the desk between us. "He thinks he can bully a crazy woman into silence." "What is that?" Nate asked, staring at the black rectangle. "That," I said, "is the difference between a rumor and a felony. He wants to play with fear. I just need to play with evidence." The phone call did not come from a blocked number. It came from a landline with a prefix that everyone in Seabrook Heights recognized but few ever received. It was the private line of the Whitlock estate, Mrs. Mercer. The voice on the other end was raspy, aged like expensive whiskey. "This is Eleanor Whitlock. I have heard you are quite the nuisance. I like people who make noise with the truth. Come see me. Now." Eleanor Whitlock was not just wealthy, she was the gravitational center of our city. She ran the Whitlock Civic Foundation, the organization that decided which buildings got built and whose names went on hospital wings. I drove to her estate, my hands steady on the wheel. She met me in her sunroom, a space filled with orchids that looked more predatory than decorative. She did not offer me tea. She slid a thick, bound document across the glass table. "Caldwell Development is asking for $5 million in community revitalization grants for the Harborline Commons project," Eleanor said, watching me over the rim of her spectacles. "Dylan has been calling my board members all morning. He is demanding we ignore you. He says you are a vindictive woman with a loose grip on reality. But the more he screams, the more I wonder why he is so afraid of a compliance consultant. He is afraid because he built a skyscraper on a swamp." "Mrs. Whitlock," I replied, opening the file. "Then show me the water," she said. "I am hiring you. consider yourself a special ethics advisor to the foundation. Find me a reason to say no that will hold up in court. I flipped through the grant application. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the kill switch. It was buried in the addendum regarding federal matching funds. Here, I pointed to a paragraph in small print. To qualify for the state tier funding, the applicant and all key principals must certify they are compliant with Workplace Fair Conduct Tier 1 standards. That specifically excludes leadership involved in active harassment or discrimination claims. Eleanor leaned in. Go on. Lorraine Caldwell is listed as a board director for the development entity. I explained. Her suspension from the yacht club yesterday was for staff harassment and discriminatory exclusion. If you approve this grant while a director is under disciplinary review for those exact issues, the foundation loses its own federal accreditation. It is not just $5 million. If this goes through, you lose your tax-exempt status. Eleanor sat back and smiled. It was a terrifying expression. So, if I fund them, I burn my own house down. And Dylan knew about the club incident when he resent the application this morning. He hoped you wouldn't check the bylaws, I said. He hoped wrong. When I returned to the apartment, Nate was standing in the living room holding a heavy box wrapped in navy paper. He looked bewildered. This came for you, he said. It's from the Association of Governance Professionals. I opened it. Inside was a crystal paperweight and a letter welcoming me to the National Ethics Oversight Committee. It was a symbolic shield. The industry was watching, and they were choosing a side. It was not Dylan's. I don't understand, Nate said, his voice shaking. Dylan is out there telling everyone you are crazy. He is burning you in the press, and the system is sending you gifts. He is playing checkers. Nate, I said, placing the crystal on the table. He thinks this is about who can shout the loudest. This is chess. The board doesn't care about his feelings. They care that I am the one protecting the liability. Nate sat down heavily on the sofa. He looked small. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so violently I could almost hear the air crack. We need to talk, he said, staring at his hands. Not here. Somewhere neutral. A coffee shop. Please. Riley. I can't breathe in here. Fine, I said. Tomorrow. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my lawyer. Dylan had just filed a preliminary injunction and a request for a gag order. He was trying to sew my mouth shut legally. I looked at the copy of the grant application I had taken from Eleanor's house. Dylan was trying to silence me with a lawsuit, unaware that I was holding the document that proved he had committed fraud against a charitable foundation. You want to talk in a neutral place. Nate, I thought. There are no neutral places left. We met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the harbor, a place filled with the noise of espresso machines and strangers, far enough from the Caldwell estate to be considered neutral ground. Nate slid a single sheet of paper across the metal table. It was not a napkin with a love note. It was a typed press release, drafted by the family's crisis management team. It is the only way to stop the lawsuit. Riley, Nate said, his eyes fixed on his cooling latte. You issue a statement saying your actions were personal, that you were emotional and unauthorized. You say you were under stress. I read the text. It was a confession of incompetence. It was designed to save the Caldwell stock price by burying my professional credibility. If I sign this, I said, tapping the paper, I admit to fabricating a compliance breach. My license will be revoked. My firm will close. You are asking me to commit professional suicide to save your brother's ego. I am asking you to save the family, Nate snapped, then lowered his voice as heads turned. If the financing collapses, everything goes. The trust, the properties, the standing, and you. I said softly, yes, me. Nate looked up, and for the first time, the mask of the dutiful son slipped. I am 40 years old, Riley. I have never applied for a job in my life. I don't know who I am without that development company. I'm terrified. I'm not you. I can't just exist on my own. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. He was not protecting them because he loved them. He was protecting them because he was terrified of the void that awaited him outside the gate. I cannot set myself on fire to keep you warm. Nate, I said, I won't sign. I left him there. That night, the doorbell rang. I checked the camera, expecting process servers or Dylan in a rage. Instead, I saw Lorraine. She was alone. She was not wearing her usual armor of pearls and stiff blazers. She wore a simple raincoat, and she looked 20 years older than she had at the engagement party. I opened the door. She walked in without a word and sat on the edge of the sofa. She did not scream. She did not demand loyalty. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook with a cracked spine. "This was given to me by Bruce's mother 40 years ago," Lorraine said, her voice dry as dust. She called it the Caldwell Standard. "It is a list of rules: how to dress, how to speak, how to slowly isolate a wife from her own family until she has no one left but us." I hated her for it. And then, I used it on you. I became the gatekeeper because I was too weak to burn the gate down. She placed the notebook on the table. It was a confession of a cycle of abuse, handed down like an heirloom. "Why are you here?" Lorraine, I asked. "Because Dylan is reckless," she said. "And because I found this." She slid a manila folder across the coffee table. Inside were bank statements from the Caldwell Development operating account. She pointed to a recurring monthly wire transfer. "Apex Ridge Strategies," Lorraine said, $50,000 a month, listed as consulting fees. I checked the vendor list. There are no deliverables, no reports, no invoices. I opened the file and scanned the numbers. It took me less than a minute to see the pattern. The payments were structured to avoid automatic flagging, but they were sloppy. They coincided perfectly with the dates Dylan had claimed personal losses on his speculative stock trades. "He is not just paying a shell company," I said, looking up at her. "He is draining the community grant money and the project capital to cover his own gambling debts. This is not family drama, Lorraine. This is embezzlement. It is money laundering." Lorraine closed her eyes. "I thought he was just ambitious, but he is stealing from the very legacy Bruce thinks he is building." I stood up and walked to my desk. I did not feel triumph. I felt the cold clarity of the end game. "We are not going to the press," I said. "We are going to legal." I picked up my phone and drafted an email to the senior partner at Keller and Voss, the city's most feared corporate law firm. "Set the meeting for tomorrow at noon. I told Lorraine, I want everyone there: Bruce, Dylan, Logan, you, and a court reporter. If Dylan does not show up, this folder goes directly to the district attorney and the FBI." Nate walked out of the bedroom. He had been listening. He looked from his mother, broken and small on the sofa, to the file on the table that contained his brother's crimes. He looked at me, and the fear in his eyes had changed. It was no longer the fear of losing his status. It was the fear of realized truth. "They aren't a family," Nate whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "They are hostages." The conference room at Keller and Voss was designed to intimidate. It was all glass walls and polished mahogany, situated 40 floors above the street where normal people lived. Bruce sat at the head of the table, his face gray. Lorraine sat to his right, looking like she had aged 10 years in 2 days. Logan was staring at his shoes. Vivian sat apart from them, near the window, twisting her engagement ring. And across from the Caldwell clan sat the legal counsel for the Whitlock Foundation, a man named Mr. Sterling, who looked like he sharpened his teeth on granite. Dylan was pacing the length of the room, vibrating with a manic energy. He pointed a finger at me. "She is a blackmailer," Dylan shouted, his voice echoing off the glass. "This entire meeting is a farce. She is holding the company hostage because her feelings got hurt. I want a retraction. Riley, I want you to admit on record that you fabricated these compliance issues. or I will sue you for every penny you will ever earn." I sat calmly, my hands folded over the manila folder. I did not blink. "I do not fabricate. Dylan," I said, my voice steady. "I audit. I did not file a false report. I triggered a review based on existing complaints. The club suspension is real. The museum hold is real. The bank freeze is real. Those are not my feelings. Those are your consequences. It is a smear campaign," Dylan roared. Suddenly, a sharp clack cut through the room. It was the sound of a heavy diamond hitting the table. We all turned. Vivian had taken off her engagement ring. She slid it across the mahogany toward Logan. "I heard the recording. Logan," Vivian said, her voice trembling but clear. "The one where your mother calls Riley a social climber and jokes about cutting the catering budget for my wedding because the Lockhart girl won't notice the difference. I am not a project, Logan, and I am not going to let you people turn me into whatever this is." "Viv, wait," Logan started, half rising from his chair. "Baby, please." "Sit down," Logan Dillon snapped at him. "Stop being pathetic. We are talking about the business." Logan froze. He looked at his brother, then at the ring, and he sank back into his chair. He was too owned by them to move. I turned my attention back to the table. It was time. "Speaking of business," I said, opening the folder. "Let us discuss Apex Ridge strategies." The room went deadly silent. Dylan stopped pacing. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. "Who?" Bruce asked, frowning. "It is a consulting firm." "Bruce," I explained, sliding the bank statements toward the Whitlock lawyer. "Caldwell Development has been wiring them $50,000 a month for 2 years. There are no invoices, no deliverables. Curiously, the dates of the transfers match the dates of Dylan's margin calls on his personal trading accounts. Mr. Sterling picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the numbers. He looked at Dylan. "Mr. Caldwell," Sterling said, his tone icy. "These are grant funds mixed with operating capital. If this money was diverted for personal use, that is federal wire fraud." It is a clerical error," Dylan stammered, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "An accounting mistake. I can explain it. It is just a holding structure." Bruce looked at his eldest son. For the first time, the look of adoration was gone, replaced by the horrified realization that he was looking at a thief. "You stole from the company," Bruce whispered. "You stole from the foundation." Lorraine did not speak. She stared at the table, looking at her hands. She knew. She had brought me the file. She was letting him drown. The door opened then. Nate walked in. He did not go to his parents. He did not go to his brothers. He walked to my side of the table and pulled out the empty chair next to me. He sat down. Dylan turned on him like a cornered animal. "Nate," Dylan hissed, "you get her under control. Right now. You sign the statement denying her authority. You tell them she is unstable. If you don't, I will cut you out of the trust. You will be nothing." Nate looked at his brother. He looked at the father who had bullied him and the mother who had excluded his wife. "I am not signing anything, Dylan," Nate said quietly. "And I am done being afraid of you." Dylan slammed his hands on the table, leaning toward me. "I will sue you. Riley, I will drag you through court for 10 years. I will bury you in legal fees until you starve." I reached into my bag and pulled out the black hard drive. I set it gently on top of the Apex Ridge file. "Go ahead and sue." "Dylan," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "This is a backup of your email server from 3 years ago, the one you asked me to organize. It proves you knew about the environmental toxicity at the Harbor Line site and paid an inspector to falsify the report. If you file a lawsuit, this drive becomes evidence in discovery. You won't just lose the company. You will go to prison." Dylan stared at the drive. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse in a designer suit. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. He knew the game was over. I had not just checkmated him. I had knocked the board off the table. Dylan looked at the hard drive, then at the file. And finally, he turned his feral gaze on Nate. He lunged across the corner of the table, grabbing Nate's shoulder with a desperation that looked violent. "Nate, listen to me," Dylan pleaded, his voice cracking. "You have to sign the denial. Right now. Tell them she is lying. Tell them she stole those files. If you don't, the stock tanks tomorrow. Do you hear me? You are killing the family." He was placing our marriage on the table like a bargaining chip, expecting Nate to trade me for the company letterhead. Nate stood up. He did not shove Dylan away. He simply stepped back, letting his brother's hand fall into empty air. "I am resigning, Dylan," Nate said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room, effective immediately. "I am stepping down from the board, and I am removing myself from the trust. And I will not sign a single piece of paper that insults my wife." "You are walking away," Dylan sneered. "You are a Caldwell. You are nothing without us." "I would rather be a nothing that can sleep at night," Nate replied. "I am choosing to be a human being before I am a Caldwell." Bruce spoke then. His voice was heavy, sounding like stones grinding together. "That is enough." Bruce looked at Dylan. The pride that usually shone in his eyes when he looked at his eldest son was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying disappointment. "You will step down as CEO. Dylan," Bruce said, "today. You will repay every cent you diverted to Apex Ridge within the week, and you will submit to a full independent audit." "Dad, you can't." "If you do not," Bruce interrupted, his voice rising, "I will personally drive this file to the district attorney's office. I built this company on reputation. I will not let you turn it into a crime scene." Dylan looked frantic. I was going to pay it back. I just had a liquidity issue with the market swing. It was a loan." The room went dead silent. He had just confessed. It was not a clerical error. It was theft. He had turned himself from a prince into a felon in one sentence. I leaned forward. "It was time to close the book. Here are the terms," I said. "Dylan resigns all leadership roles immediately. The money is returned to the company accounts within 48 hours. Caldwell Development enters a mandatory 2-year compliance program supervised by the Mercer Governance Lab. And finally, Dylan issues a written public apology to the staff of the yacht club for creating a hostile environment." "I am not apologizing to waiters," Dylan spat. "Then you don't get the grant," Mr. Sterling, the Whitlock attorney, said, closing his folder. "The foundation will not release a dime until Mrs. Mercer certifies you are compliant. And if the foundation walks, the bank calls the loan. You have no road left." "Mr. Caldwell." Dylan looked around the room. Logan wouldn't meet his eyes. Bruce was looking at the window. Nate was standing next to me. He was alone. He stood up, buttoned his jacket with trembling hands, and walked out of the glass room. He did not look like a winner. He looked like a man who had finally realized that gravity applies to everyone. Lorraine stood up slowly. She looked at me. There was no hatred left in her face, only a vast, weary exhaustion. "I used tradition to mask a polite kind of violence," she said softly. "I thought if I kept the circle tight, we would be safe. I was wrong. Today, it ends." She picked up her bag and walked out, leaving the Caldwell Standard notebook on the table. It was over. Nate and I walked out into the hallway. The adrenaline was fading, leaving us both tired. He did not try to hold my hand. We stood a few feet apart, looking at the elevator doors. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Nate said. "I was a coward for a long time. No." I said, "I don't forgive you yet, but I respect what you did in there." "What happens now?" "Therapy," I said, "boundaries, and a new apartment. If we are going to do this, Nate, we do it on my terms. No more family only. No more silence. He nodded. Okay. I looked at him. They had locked the doors to keep me out, thinking I would fade away in the cold. They didn't realize I didn't need their key. I had built my own table, and for the first time, the man standing next to me had chosen to sit there, not because he was told to, but because he wanted to stay. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on the ending. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.